to the theme.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's conversation about the new research report, How to Empower Women-Led Businesses and Make Public Procurement More Inclusive, a new research report by the Open Contracting Partnership and Value for Women. We're really happy to see and encouraged to see so much interest in this webinar and in this discussion. Our intention is to keep it informative and conversational. One of the things that motivated us when we set out to do this research was at the Open Contracting Partnership, we support partners all around the world to improve public contracting processes, to improve public procurement outcomes. And one of the dimensions that many partners are seeking to do, and it's more important now than ever, is make public procurement more fair and more inclusive, including for women-led businesses. And that's what motivated us to take on this piece of research. We've seen from different studies that quantitatively it is difficult to estimate the participation of women-led businesses, and when it is done, it's shown that women-led businesses are underrepresented in public procurement. And so what we set out to do together with Value for Women was to understand what are the barriers and the challenges that women-led businesses are actually facing when it comes to entering public procurement markets, and what are the strategies and how can open contracting approaches help to mitigate those barriers that they're experiencing. And I won't go through a detailed summary of the research findings. For that, we very much encourage you to read the full report, as well as the shorter, more executive summary version. We've created an insights version of the report that has the key highlights, the key findings. That would be a useful place to start. But I thought I would share some of the insights that I found particularly interesting about the report. First of all, one of the challenges that we encountered, or that was found through the research, was that it is difficult to identify women-led businesses. In most public procurement regimes, there is no clear definition of what is a women-led business, and there isn't enough gender desegregated information about who is bidding and who is winning public contracts. So there are some exciting approaches on how this can be done quantitatively, but there are, that is one of the challenges that happens when we're just trying to get started and understanding the situation for women-led businesses. If you don't understand how to measure it, it's difficult to take a baseline. We don't know how we need to improve. Another thing that came up was negative perceptions. I think it's not a huge surprise that there might be some bias and some discrimination happening in the process, but it was interesting to see how negative perceptions affected women-led businesses' participation on both sides, from the perceptions that women-led businesses had about public procurement and the perceptions that government officials might have about women-led businesses. And then, interestingly, there were some barriers to women's participation that at first glance look more systemic, a little bit more structural and outside of the realm of what's happening in the public procurement process itself, such as women's lack of access to finance or operating on a smaller scale. But I think what we've seen and what we've learned, particularly through our conversations with partners in Dominican Republic, Buenos Aires, and Chile, who were very happy are joining us in this conversation today, is that there are strategies that can be pursued by governments in order to create a more level playing field, a fair and more inclusive environment for women-led businesses. So with that, I want to start the conversation. And the first person that I want to talk to about this research is Rebecca Fries from Value for Women, who was our partner in undertaking this research. And Rebecca, from you, what I'd really like to understand is what for you was the most surprising thing that you learned through this project?
Thank you. Thanks so much, Lindsay. And both for this opportunity to share some insights, but also Value for Women has been thrilled to be a part of this effort and to compiling this fantastic report, especially since we're really committed as an organization to keeping women at the forefront of business efforts more broadly across the globe. So firstly, congrats to the Open Contracting team and to my colleagues at Value for Women who really led this amazing effort. I think this report is really timely, given having COVID-19 as our current global backdrop. I think the procurement efforts broadly can contribute to rebuilding in a way that embeds inclusion. And I think this is one of the many reasons we're particularly excited about this report. We're also really grateful to the experts that we'll hear from a little later on today, but also to the broad pool of other experts that we were able to draw on to really compile the insights and the lessons learned that all of you will see outlined in the report. So we're really grateful for that. In terms of some, what's new and what's exciting, I think it's important to say maybe what's familiar. I think we're not also, we haven't been surprised, and many of you won't be surprised to see some of the content in these reports that look at why is this important to do. And I like that the report really focuses on honing in on why that's important in a procurement context, focuses on understanding some of the barriers, which we saw in the poll earlier as well, and really looks at those barriers in a nuanced way within the procurement context. So things like women not having access to information about procurement processes, or having a perception of corruption or bias. So really understanding that to the contracting process, I think is particularly insightful for those of us that are working in this area. I want to share three quick things about what's really exciting in terms of takeaways for us, in particular at Value for Women. I think one of the first things is that it isn't rocket science necessarily, right? It doesn't have to be overly complex when we're thinking, how do we create procurement processes and structures that are more inclusive? I think within that, the report highlights the strength and the robustness of the opportunities at hand to just start somewhere. And that brings me to the second point, which I think we see this coming out in the report as well, that it takes effort and commitment. So being able to start somewhere, so choosing something that might be a low-hanging fruit or a simple pathway, such as trying to figure out what is a woman-led business and tracking that with tracking data. They can be very simple efforts as a place to start, but it does take commitment and effort to carrying those through. And the last thing I'd like to share is, and I think this is maybe even the biggest kind of highlight for us, is that the report really draws out what good looks like in procurement. And we're going to see and hear more about that in a few minutes from specific examples like the Dominican Republic and Chile and Argentina. But I think these examples of what good looks like, what innovation looks like, and particularly, for example, the Dominican Republic case that we'll hear from and that you can see in the report, not only does it tell us what good looks like and sets a peer, example to peer governments, it also demonstrates how procurement processes can be communicated and to be able to demonstrate transparency, both to suppliers, to have, increase that sense of fairness and opportunity, but also how it can set examples to others across the globe. So I think those are the three kind of key highlights that I would say are particularly important within this report. And I just want to double click on the fact that we need more examples, particularly from emerging economies, to be able to lead the way and shine the light on how and what gender inclusive and inclusive procurement look like more broadly. And so just really appreciate the efforts that we've seen demonstrated in this report and by the participants today of doing and sharing. And we just really need a lot more of that to both inspire our neighbor countries, but also looking more broadly across the globe. So thanks once again. And I'd just like to encourage those of you that participated to keep doing and keep sharing your stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And I agree on the need for more examples. And I'm really excited to dive into the real life examples of some of the people who are on this call today with us. And one of the voices that is really important to hear in these conversations is the perspective of the private sector. So what is the situation for the women-led business, and how are they approaching public procurement? And encountering the system as it is. So we're very happy to have Paulina Bustos with us here today. Paulina, you have been a bidder and a supplier to government. What would you say has been your experience, and what would you have as a key ask to make public procurement more fair to women-led businesses?
Thank you, Lindsay, and thanks everyone. Y hola a los que estamos acá en español. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this conversation, because I think it's very important to recognize that it's different to be a woman-led organization working with the government than other type of organizations, right? And I guess it's the same for other minorities. So I think it's very important to highlight that and then think about how you change that. The experience, it's sometimes we say that when people ask us what is the #1 quality of our company, we always say resilience. And that answer comes from, we have experienced so much bureaucracy since we started, because we work with the government, that we feel like that's the best thing that we have. Yeah, that's the best quality that we have. You need a lot of patience, and I think that the #1 thing that you need is the decision of doing it. You know, like, we're gonna do it. And the good thing that we had at the beginning is that we had a grant that helped us to start, and we were an NGO at the time. So we recognized that because of that grant, we were able to manage the bureaucracy, because we were only like a startup starting. Then I guess you cannot work with the government, because processes are very long, and they not only take a long time to finish a process and to tell you that you're going to be the supplier, they also take a long time to pay you. So you definitely need investment at the beginning. So I'm going to highlight that, because sometimes when we talk about these processes, we always talk about from the point of view of, you know, like, you need patience, you need to like do the things, but the reality is that you also need money to start. Either to be from an investor or a grant, or maybe like your own savings, but you do need like a 6 months runway to start working with the government, because that's probably what it's going to take for them to make you the first payment. So starting with that, that's something that needs to change. And I think the other thing that needs to change from the government, it's something that Rebecca said. First, recognizing that it's not rocket science. Like, all these processes are human and are human made, right? So we can change them. We should be able to change them, right? So the government wants to work with more minority led organizations, then they are able to do it. Like, it's hard, and there are hard conversations there in the legislation or with their procurement teams, but it is possible. So let's start with that. And I think that if you ask me like one key thing, there are a lot, but if I can choose just one, it will be just to have a clearer communication. Like, some of the things that are very hard for us working with the government is that their contracts are very hard to read. Their procurement bids are extremely like cryptic. We don't know what they say a lot of times, and you also need to talk to them on the phone, or make a lot of emails, or like even go and visit to that government to understand what they were trying to say, right? And that's because government language is very hard to understand. So if there's only one thing that they're going to change, I will say be clear on what you need with human language. And I think that from that, a lot of things are going to change.
Thank you so much, Paulina. And a lot of what you were saying resonated in terms of what other aspects of the research was revealing to us. You know, what you mentioned on access to finance and prompt payment. Several other people, as part of the research, reported this as a challenge when women-led businesses face more barriers in terms of getting access to finance. One person reported that when they went to the bank to try to get a loan, they were asked where their male business partner was. So you might think this is a problem that's bigger than public procurement, but there are some creative ways that government can take action to ensure prompt payment and to support businesses to participate with some access to finance. And I'm excited to learn more about some of the initiatives that are underway. So perhaps first we will go in our travels to the Dominican Republic. I'd like to introduce Wilka Di Dume, and Andres de la Rosa, who are with the government of the Dominican Republic working to improve women's participation in public procurement. And I'd love to hear from you how Dominican Republic has actually made some progress to improve women's participation.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk first, and then Ulgari is going to continue the presentation. So it's very interesting to hear all the experiences and how you have been working with women and taking that perspective on public contracting. And we want to tell you the story about Dominican Republic. And Dominican Republic in 2012, we had a procurement system where most of the things were not advertised. Less than 2% of the contracts were advertised, and we live on a market that was very hidden. So you have a very large asymmetry of information, together with the inability to comply with tax and bureaucratic requirements, and the absence of policies of training, limited participation of women in public procurement. And those things were preventing them from taking advantage of the opportunities offered by the largest buyer in the country, because governments are the largest buyer in every country in this world. So before the experience, we identified that we only had 2,000 women registered on the registry of provider. And they had little awards for women, and those were concentrated in only a regional area and only an industry, and we identified that. Another thing that we identified before implementing our strategy to include women in public procurement, we identified that there were no training, the absence of training and technical assistance to sell the state, the existence of a large number of informal companies led by women, and also a low level of women association, and that harm in a way that small women-led businesses couldn't get together to participate. Now they started to do that. Other thing that we found through surveys, and that the system had a large degree of distrust toward women's, because they said that they didn't have the capacity to deliver goods, and they actually said that. And also, other thing that we identified is that technical specification and the evaluation criteria did not favor the hiring of women-led businesses. And finally, some other thing that you already mentioned was the dispersion of information on business opportunity for women, and the low participation of women in other areas of the country. So Wilkali is going to continue. She's going to talk more about the model and how we started to make a strategy to include women in public procurement. Yeah.
Yes, hi, good morning to everyone. As my partner was talking, we started to identify the potential market. In the Dominican Republic, public procurement accounts goes for over 5 million, which include goods, service, and infrastructures that are similar to the things that any household could buy. So actually that was one point, because women think that they cannot approach the public procurement, the public market. So actually by the law, we have a quote separated. We need to destine to public procurement the 20% to SMEs and the 5% to women-led business. We have that as a procurement market opportunity. After we identify the target that we can work with that quote already, then we started defining which is a woman-owned enterprise and its characteristics. So in Dominican Republic, the company must be managed by the woman who have a shareholding or a share capital of more than 50%. This situation is verified with the gender marker included in the state supplier register. We did an audit to the supplier register, and we include the gender market. So we start identified woman-owned enterprise. So actually, we identified that 52% of the women-owned enterprise are over 40 years old. 80% of them have kids, 76% have a college degree, and 65% of them are services provider. We also identify some barriers of entry that you mentioned a few of them already, which is that informational. They had a little or no knowledge about procurement opportunities, little use of technologies to do business, so they couldn't use our procurement portal. When it comes to general market, they did not believe they were capable of winning a contract. And technical specification and evaluation criteria that does not favor the hiring of women. Payment delay, it was a hard one because we didn't have a policy to assurance the pay in a certain time. So women tends to focus on less complex procedure, which are of low monetary amount. That things has been changing during the years because women are getting contracts with a bigger amount of money than maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Then after that, we start creating that environment. We start working with the regulatory reform. We start targeted assistance strategies, and we creative indicators. So actually, we start working regionalization. We start identifying around the country where those women are. And we started visiting those places. We start implementing the portal so they can approach public procurement from any place of the country. And from the commodity, like I'm in the house and I can just take the opportunities of the public market. Also, we train them, women on the web portal, so that we have that any woman can participate from the safety or their home in any time, any day. And we started creating an indicator to track the development of women in different industries inside the public contracting market. Also, we made a list of women-owned providers available for the institutions so they can buy for women. A lot of institutions told them, we don't know where those women are. So we started identifying and we create a list so they can invite women to present offer. As in the result of that intervention, we have this progress in women history in public procurement. As you may see in the 2013, it was less, like around 20%, and we ended up like around the 2019 above the 30% of share of female distinct provider by business size. We have natural person, certified SMEs, and not certified and other organizations that are getting contracts and they are participating actively in the public market. Also, we can see the total award amount in public procurement by women. We can see a big amount in the 2013, 14, and 15. Those amounts corresponding to a strategy that the government did. It was the infrastructure raffle, and a lot of women get a contract with the government with an infrastructure contract. And then we can see in the 2018, with the implementation of the portal, how the amount rised up again because women start believing and trusting in this procurement system, which it was more transparency and gave them more security of the offer that they were presenting. So in the 2018, that amount rised up again in 18 and 19. So those are the results that we can present to you, and those are the strategy that we have been working in the Dominican Republic to make access to the public market to the woman-led business.
Thank you so much, Wilcari and Andres, for your presentation from the Dominican Republic. And I just want to reflect on some of the key things that we heard. about how important it was to actually engage and understand the business communities that you were trying to include, and how the different strategies were adapted to the specific challenges and barriers that you discovered. Some of the important lessons learned, I think, have to do with that transparency and also that education and engagement. You know, building capacity, awareness, and trust is so key. And finally, it is wonderful to see your final slides where you've actually, you know, shown your baseline and your progress and the journey that you've had along the way. So very, very interesting to learn about this. And I'm sure we'll have questions happening in the chat, and we will be coming back to give everybody a chance to ask questions and have a conversation with the panel. But before we open it up, I'd like to keep traveling around the world, and next would love to visit Chile, where we are lucky to have Trinidad Inostroza, who is the former director of Chile Compra. And Chile Compra has also embarked on efforts to improve inclusion and fairness for women-led businesses. So I'd love to hear from Trinidad what she feels made the biggest difference in Chile.
Hi, Lindsay and George. Good morning and good afternoon. Everywhere you I think that there are many people from different parts of the world, and well, one of the most important thing and the main action for us was the creation of the Women Supplier Certification called Sello Empresa Mujer in 2015. This certification helps purchasing entities to identify companies run by women and those with more than 50% female ownership. This certification can be requested as an evaluation criterion to be included in the bidding documents or to demonstrate the social impact of direct contract offers below $700. This certification was part of an ambitious program that we worked with a civil society organization. To start, we looked at the baseline that revealed that from 2007 to 2013, women entrepreneurs represented only 26% of total acquisition transaction in Chile. A situation that requires attention, bearing in mind that 64% of these women are head of household and approximately 60% are creating additional jobs. With this information, we took many actions, such as teaching women how to use this certification called Sello Mujer, telling buyers how to identify women using this certification. We made regulatory modification and communication campaigns. We worked very hard for 4 years. And at the end of the period, we measured the result. We achieved a 25% increase in women's participation in public procurement. So, in conclusion, the result confirmed that we had been on the right path. We managed to break the trend. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Trinidad. And again, you know, I think some of the key things that came out there is how important it is to define, you know, the group that you're trying to support, women-led businesses. And it's really interesting to learn about the Sello Mujer certification program. And then again, you know, measuring the results, seeing if the strategies are working, and that helps us to know if we're on the right track. One of my counterparts who works as part of an Indigenous business association here in Canada has always told me, you know, if you don't measure it, you won't achieve it. And so I think that's what's so encouraging about these case studies, is this attempt to actually quantify the progress that's being made. So with that, we'd like to travel once again to the city of Buenos Aires, where we have Marissa Miodowski with us here today, who's leading a gender strategy for the city. And Marissa, would love to hear, what lessons you're taking into public procurement in Buenos Aires to improve participation of women-led businesses, and kind of going forward, what are the plans, especially with the economic recovery from COVID, to continue to be inclusive as we try to recover economically.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone there in the cyberspace. Thank you so much for the possibility of being part of this meeting today and for being part of the report. It has been really an interesting and very huge opportunity. As I think the colleague from Value for Women was mentioning before, this is not rocket science. But as you can see here in this meeting, we have a lot of experience in the region, and this has been really important for the city of Buenos Aires. We have learned a lot from Trinidad and from our colleagues in the República Dominicana about how they implemented this stamp, this women's stamp for public procurement. And with their lessons learned, we started our own Sello Mujer. The Sello Mujer we implemented last year at the end of 2019. So it's still very young. And there are still very numerous people inside the administration, inside the city government, who don't even know about it. So from my perspective as a civil servant with the capacity to make changes, decisions, influence within the administration, I believe that there are three things that we can make in order to have more impact with this project. The first thing that I believe that we have to do is to disseminate and inform more about the women's staff inside the administration. Not only train outside the women, but also our colleagues, our civil servants colleagues, about the power that this tool has in order to improve or enhance women's economic autonomy. So I think that we make this training mandatory for all staff, and we are in the process of doing that for the next period. Second, I believe that we have to establish some sort of incentives. I don't know if our colleagues in Chile or in República Dominicana did that, but I believe that we have to do something to motivate ministries or agencies in order to purchase using the women's staff with the gender perspective. We can't have an award or some sort of recognition for those ministries who did the most of their purchases with the gender perspective. And finally, I think that we need to introduce some sort of change in the way that we publish the bids. Paulina was mentioning before that it is difficult for women to understand that we speak in a very complicated language, and we agree with that. This is something that came out in the first research that we did while we're asking women why didn't they presented themselves for the tenders that the government was organizing. So not only we have to make that language simpler, but also, as the report mentions, most of the women-owned companies operate in a small scale. So another change that we have to do is to enable for smaller bidding options. In our procurement system, we call that lines. And just to give you an example, instead of publishing for a tender for 100,000 uniforms, that is a product that the government buys a lot, we could allow for offering for a fraction of that line, let's say 5,000 uniforms. And this will give a possibility for small cooperatives or for even one owner of a uniform producing company to present itself for the bid. I believe that these three changes that are very easily to implement, and that I believe that we will be implementing that in the short run, could make a change, could open the game for more women to enhance their economic opportunities. You asked me about the recovery. Our mayor announced it last Friday that we are starting to think about the switch on plan. We are from yesterday onwards with the city of Buenos Aires, which was in this isolation period, is starting to open certain activities. These activities will have not only the possibility for people to meet each other, but will be accompanied by an economic recovery plan. Within that plan, we believe that this policy, the Sello Mujer, has the capacity to play a main role. We will encourage our ministries to do their purchases, their public purchases, using the gender perspective and prioritizing companies that do have the stamp. And we hope that this will make an impact in the recovery of many women-owned enterprises.
Thank you so much, Marissa. And I just want to highlight a couple of the key points that you made. One of them is how important it is to have a change management strategy within government. So what you mentioned about building capacity of the government staff, and also, you know, presenting them with incentives, because when you're asking people to do things differently and to approach a problem differently, sometimes that requires some education and some incentives. And it's wonderful to see how the gender strategy is being prominently placed within the recovery plan. It's great to see that some people are already starting to ask questions in the chat. And so now is the time that I will ask everybody, please do put in the chat your questions or indicate if you want to ask a question. And while you think of what your questions are, I want to turn over to our former OCP colleague, Hera Hussein. So Hera was the Senior Advocacy Manager here at the Open Contracting Partnership, who led on a lot of the work that went into the gender report. And now she is actually leading a feminist organization called Shane. So Hera, it's wonderful to see you, and I hope all is well in your new role. But I was hoping that you could kind of share some of your reflections in terms of when you design this research and what you've learned through doing it, what advice you have for us in the open contracting community going forward.
Thanks, Lindsay, and it's great to hear from everyone who's been involved in the research. I think that there are a few things that are quite clear from the experiences of the countries that were involved in the research and what we've seen from other places in the open contracting community. So like the number one barrier seems to be, you know, like in starting and maintaining a business. So governments can do a lot of things in supporting. So when public authorities are looking at their gender strategy, they shouldn't just think about, you know, suppliers that they know, but they should think about suppliers that they don't know and why those businesses never get to them. So thinking about how do they do outreach, you know, what kind of like incentives can they provide, or kind of business support that can be given to help those businesses with cash flow? Can they make their programs simpler? So you heard Marissa talking about small, and Trinidad talking about smaller contracts, shorter contracts. And also thinking about how can the whole way, like, you know, we talk about gender can be a lot more inclusive as well. So, you know, we shouldn't just be thinking about women suppliers, but also thinking about, you know, women and people of other genders who are users of those public goods and services. So how can they help co-design better procurement systems, better end products? So for example, if there is a community school that is being built, you know, how can those people who would be the users of those community space be involved in the, you know, in the designing of the contract process or selecting the you know, the successful awardee? And there's some really good examples happening in some parts looking at that participatory procurement. So there's a lot of interesting things happening in the open contract community. And I think it's just about mainstreaming and making sure that these are not one-off conversations.
Thank you so much, Hera. All right, turning to some of the questions from the chat. I think one of the first questions I see here is from Hiba El Jardali. Hiba, if I understand your question correctly, it was for Trinidad and wanting to understand how Chile decided on the criteria of how to define a women-owned business. Did I understand your
Hi. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much for picking my question. No, what I meant is like, because Trinidad, she showed us the improvement and the data. I mean, what improvement have been done and how they were able to access and participate in the public procurement. But I don't know if they among the improvement that they did, I mean, they accessed women-owned businesses to the portal, and they educated them and stuff. But I would like to know if they made any changes to the criteria required to apply for tenders. I mean, to tailor the size of women-owned businesses.
Thank you so much for clarifying the question, Hiba. So yes, Trinidad, was there any changes made to the criteria for the tenders themselves?
Well, we made new regulation about tenders, and we include in one of the points that the public entities can include in their tender is one criteria about social impact or public inclusive public procurement, and they can put one criteria about women in public procurement, and they can use a certification, say empresa mujer, in tender, and they can give some point if the enterprise have this certification, and it's optional. It's not mandatory, but the public entities can use this certification like a criterion in their tenders.
So they get extra points if they have the certification, something like that. Yeah.
And in the case of in the equal points, maybe they can use this criteria in order to close or to finish the same point. Yes.
Thank you so much, Trinidad. And I think likewise to the other representatives of other cities, if you want to share about criteria and how, if there were any changes in criteria in order to make processes more inclusive. Maybe when we come to you on different questions, if you want to highlight anything about that, you can. One of the next questions I see is from Petra, which is about using data analytics to find out more about what companies have previously won procurement, to know more about the main drivers, to better apply a gender lens. So I believe that the Open Contracting Partnership has recently supported Buenos Aires to do this type of analysis for looking at small and medium-sized businesses. So I don't know if Marisa would be able to speak to this topic.
Hi, to be honest, I am aware about the work that you've been doing with my colleagues from this agency, but I cannot go through a detailed explanation. What I can say is that we mirror the experience that Chile did. We did an analysis about our database and look at how many women were enrolled in that database in order to be allowed to make any transactions with the government. We look at that and we find that that percentage was around 20%. But then we did a double click and look at how many of these 20% has ever presented to any tender. And to our surprise, this figure was less than 5%. So the power of data and the power of like showing the data and having the data and being able to play and analyze the data is really very, very high. Because with that evidence, we were able to convince the authorities that we needed a change on that. And with the support of Trinidad and the other colleagues, we were able to design this Sello Mujer for the city government, and now starting to implement a plan to have procurement with gender perspective.
Thank you so much, Marisa. And I think Paulina wanted to come in on this question as well.
Yes, just a quick note. I believe that as Marisa was saying, like it's important to use data or quantitative data to understand what's going on. But I think that on this type of topics, qualitative data, it's even more important because there are so few people who have gone through the process that qualitative data of asking people how their process went, and like having more interviews than just like crude data, I think it's very important.
Thank you so much, Paulina. Yes, what we've seen is that it's definitely interesting and possible to use data, particularly if it's well-structured data, to look at public procurement, past public procurement, and identify, you know, which procedures were successful or had participation by women-led businesses, and what characteristics did they have that could be encouraged throughout the wider system and field. But there is no substitution for actually going out and talking with stakeholders in order to understand how we can better suit their needs. There's a few questions in here that kind of follow a theme about, you know, how to think about how we define what is a women-led business, and how we, I think, from Luis, who, again, I actually want to give a shout out to Luis Marquez from the Value for Women team, who was integral to this research. He's asking what some of the challenges were in collecting the data and identifying the women-led businesses in the baselines and tracking systems. And there's a similar question, I think, from Camilla about what were the steps that were taken to have a registry for women-owned businesses or a certification, and what data was used. So I don't know if the team from Dominican Republic might want to take a chance at answering this question.
Yes, it was about how to implement.
Yes.
Please, Wilcuddy or Andres, either of you, feel free.
Andres, go ahead, please.
Okay, yeah, that was, you know. So yes, it's a very good question about how you can identify and put on a database level women-led businesses. You have to, you need to have a process that is automatized in some way. When they register on the registry of provider, you have, we see at the business composition, we read the business composition and we say, well, more than 50% of the actionary participation is for a woman, or a woman is, it's a manager in that business. So we classified it as a women-led business. And the good thing about this is that we always have a margin of error. I mean, we have to be serious about that. There is a margin of error, but we can go deep and look into other industry and to play with that data and find more insights about how women participate. For example, we know that they tend to focus on less complex procedures. We know that they also have like a glass ceiling when it comes to bid in some contracts. We know that they don't like to participate in contracts that are above $100,000. And yeah, we have most of that information. Also, that information is public. We have the gender extension on the open contracting data standard. So anybody here, if it's interested in looking at the Dominican data in a more specific way, you can go and look at the data that we have published on the open contracting data standard. And yeah, and also we complement all that information that we have in our databases that has millions of registers with surveys. We have longitudinal data for surveys for over 5 years. So every year we do an annual survey to ask them about, yeah, so this year, how was your biggest challenge, and what things we can do better? What do you think about this procedure and this complex procedure? How we can help you? How we can develop a new training program so you can be included into the public market? And yes, data, it's very important. In the Dominican Republic, data is, we have a very data-centric institution. And yeah, and the good thing is that it's it's a very large data set, and we can play and do a lot of things with it.
Thank you so much, Andres. So I'm
also,
yes, sorry,
yes,
go ahead.
excuse me. Also, I would like to say that as one of the person approached already, with the data, we could go to the government and prove them where we need to work. Also, we could take, we need to know where are the lack of opportunities with the data. And we go and do some brown business and we'll start showing the institution, the buyers, where are the offers, and we try to make them together to make the join already. So with the round business, women start talking, people start seeing faces. It's not just something, somebody says science rocket, it is not, it's human. So as you go to places, or you go to specific provinces, and then you start make them approach, you start putting them together. This is the buyer and this is the seller. The round business for the data that we get from the woman-led business, it was very important to make them have more confidence in the system and to offer to the system. Also, the criteria of the competition, they are different. For SMEs and woman-led business, they're different to the regular market. We try to be more flexible when it comes to the prices, to the delivery time, the policies, and some technique specifications. We try to have some meeting with the sector and to understand the reality and try to adjust those criteria so they may be able to offer, and it will be good for them also.
Thank you so much, Wilkari. So just keeping an eye on the time, you know, this conversation is so fascinating, but unfortunately we're coming short. So I'm seeing some additional questions. Some of them I think kind of are complementary and fit together. One is from Carmen, and Carmen's asking about, you know, what's the business case for supplier diversity, and is it easier to make this case in some sectors? Carmen, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding your question. Are you saying the business case to the government purchasers to convince them on supplier diversity?
Hi there, I had to find my mute button. I actually think it's a business case for both the governments themselves for, you know, more jobs, better economic participation of women-owned businesses and the jobs that they create, as well as the companies that are looking to actually have a more diverse supply chain. And then that question is then related to, is there particular sectors? Is it banking? Is it infrastructure? Is it manufacturing? Where do we see the highest business case for women-owned suppliers and women-led suppliers to actually make a difference in a sector or in a country's economic development?
Thank you so much, Carmen, for that.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thanks for taking my question. I much appreciate the presentation. It's fabulous. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carmen. And maybe together, complementary to Carmen's question, I see some questions from Jade and Anna from UN Women, who were also in, UN Women was also a contributor to the report, asking again on perspectives on the business case, particularly in the face of maybe some of the arguments against it, whether that might be related to trade agreements or other challenges that were encountered. So maybe this is an opportunity for each to go to each of the governments who are part of the panel, as well as to Paulina as our representative of the private sector, for a final word on the business case, whether it's particularly relevant in any specific sectors and what kind of the main arguments they have to overcome have been. Perhaps we can start with Trinidad. Oh, we can't hear Trinidad. So maybe while Trinidad, oh, hi. I think you're muted. Perfect.
Okay. Oh, well, it's important it's a very important point, because if I understood the question, because I think when the Minister of Finance only ask savings and efficiency from the procurement system. And when we started to work in the women in public procurement, we had a problem, because my boss he didn't think about the women in public procurement, and he asked me, why are you your work is more efficiency, more saving, and no women in public procurement. And I have a big problem about that. And I need to convince him, Weinman, my boss, and it was a problem. And we did some research, and we found an argument, and we put a card on the table, and started talking about monetary value, and we said that in the case of Chile, for every 100,000 more women in the economy, the GDP increased by 0.6% approximately. And public procurement provides an opportunity to incorporate more women in the economy, because the public procurement represent almost, in average, almost 12% of the GDP in different countries, in average, and in Latin America is almost 9% of the GDP. And if you have more women in public procurement, you have more women in the wider economy. And then more women contributing to public procurement. And at the end of the day, more women in public procurement is the economy would grow. And it's an important argument in order to convince the Minister of Finance, because the public entities in charge of the public procurement system, mainly they depend of the Ministry of Finance, and it's not so easy work in favor of the women in public procurement or in favor of the other group of the society less favor. And one of the argument is more if you have more women, have more SMEs in public procurement, they contribute to the economic growth.
Thank you so much, Trinidad. Marissa, is there anything that you would add to this question?
No, because Trinidad explained that really well. What I really want to add is there are two things. One, that as governments, we cannot only make decisions based on efficiency. Our criteria needs to be a little bit wider, and we also have like a human right-based approach, and we have to take into consideration sustainability issues. We have to look into prosperity rather than into efficiency when we make decisions regarding public procurement. So all what Trinidad was mentioning, I fully agree, but we have to consider like the big picture. And the other thing that I would like to encourage you all, because I see that it's not only value for women, open contracting, the UN, many agencies, that we need more research and more evidence in order to explain and base our positions, our decisions better. So in case you can help us in order to delve a little bit deeper in how making these sort of decisions, like including more women-led business into procurement, can have an impact on transparency, on efficiency, on sustainability. That will really help us, because as the presenter, I forgot her name, was mentioning, all these pushing for these policies requires a lot of efforts and commitments. And sometimes the effort and the commitment have a stronger impact when they are based on evidence. So if you can help us to develop that evidence, to find that evidence, that will be really useful for all of us who have effort and are passionate about this issue.
Thank you so much, Marisa. And I see we're even gone over time. So maybe the final word on this question I might give to Paulina, because Carmen was also asking you for the private sector, what's the business case? If you have any final comments on that.
Yeah, I think that for working with for the private sector, working with the government might not be very attractive for all the things that we have already said, but it is a very important area of impact. So when we talk about business, a lot of people get discouraged, but I think that there's a very good case to make about the private sector to work with the government, not just business-wise, but also like impact-wise, right? And I think that a lot of companies in the private sector want to attract talent. They want to be a mission-driven organizations. And even though sometimes when we talk about the private sector, we don't imagine those things, I think it's possible, and especially startups are looking for that. So I think that that's where I will take them. And just like as a final word for what everyone was saying on the case for like women-led organizations, I think that the government needs to understand that this is something that it not only makes sense on a social level, but also on like a government-wise level, for it's a way to say it, because there is a lot of research on how women-led organizations are more efficient and can get have better cultures and consider more their users or like the citizens in case. So I will put that on the table. And also I will say that it wasn't planned like that, but before this, I was in another call talking with an international organization, and they were talking about how like working with them, it's a long process that take a lot of time and you need to have a lot of conversations. And I was thinking like, that's great for them, but that doesn't, that doesn't translate to me and to what I need to do to make my organization successful. So I think that when we are, like the last comment that I will make for governments is to be on the other place shoes and have more open conversations with private organizations or like private companies that want to work with you. Because sometimes like I see some of the governments send us bids and tell us like, please bid on this because, like this is a project that we want to do. And well, yes, but we don't want to work with you because this and that, and then your bid is like super hard to even understand. So I think that you need to like take the other person's side, and I think the government needs to do more of that and think about how can I work with the best organizations out there, and how can I work with the best people that are gonna make my government and my citizens happier.
Thank you so much, Paulina. And with that, we are over time because the conversation has just been so fascinating. But it's a good chance to just say once again that we encourage everybody to take a look at the report, the longer report or the insights version, where we go into a lot more detail about what we found through the research and the experiences of the people who've been on this call, including recommendations on how to define women-led businesses, how to establish gender-responsive procurement strategies, how to engage with the different communities, and some of the steps that can be taken. So we do encourage everybody to take a look. And coming up in terms of next steps, we definitely want to continue pursuing this work, and particularly are interested in exploring whether the lessons that we've learned through this deep dive into Latin America hold in other regions of the world. So that's something exciting coming up. And of course, want to continue to embed the lessons learned through this research into the work that we actively give to our partners around the world. So please, everybody, if you have follow-up questions, if you want to continue, we will be happy to facilitate some follow-up conversations, linking you with each other to continue the conversation. I think I saw in the chat that UN Women also has some exciting projects coming up. And I don't know if you wanted to share very briefly about that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for giving me the time. I know everybody is wanting to get out, but this idea of the business case is really holding true and ringing for everybody that we're talking about. And the thing is that we're so diverse that the business case is very context dependent. And so what we at UN Women are thinking is that the business case is not something you see and argue, and it's not the perfect talking point that we're just going to give the governments and they're magically going to start sourcing from women, but it's really building a movement and building a business case in a way that we can take collective action together on some of these procurement issues that are really conflicts at the very center, from what's happening with just neoliberal capitalism, gender equality, and crisis. So we are launching a community of practice, and we'll follow up with everybody, but we're launching a community of practice that will help us work through this business case, help us work through this data issue to come up with a movement that we can work on together that's convincing, but also is strict and is focused on the outcomes for women. So yeah, thank you so much for giving me 2 seconds.
That's very exciting, Anna, and we can't wait to contribute to that community of practice and see how we can collaborate going forward. So with that, maybe we'll sign off for today, but thank you everyone for your time. Thank you to the Value for Women team for your leadership on this research, and thank you so much to Paulina, Marisa, Wilkadi, Andres, and Trinidad for being with us here today to share your experience, and to everybody on the call. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their weeks. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank